The dust kicked up in swirling clouds as Jake Thornton rode his horse through the outskirts of a small Texas town he'd never visited before. It was 1883, and he was just passing through on his way to deliver a herd of cattle to Fort Worth. The scorching afternoon sun beat down on his weathered hat, and his throat was parched from hours in the saddle. He spotted what looked like a general store and decided to stop for supplies. As he dismounted and tied his horse to the post, he noticed her immediately. A woman sat on the wooden steps of a dilapidated house next to the store, her thin frame draped in a faded calico dress that had seen better days. Her face was gaunt, aged beyond what he suspected were her actual years, and 5 children huddled around her like sparrows seeking shelter. The youngest couldn't have been more than 3, clinging to his mother's skirt with dirt-smudged hands. The oldest, a girl of maybe 12, held a baby in her arms with a tenderness that spoke of too much responsibility for such young shoulders. Jake had seen poverty before. The frontier was full of it. But something about this scene arrested him, made his boots feel heavy as he climbed the steps to the store. He couldn't shake the image of those hollow eyes, the way the children sat so still, without the usual restlessness of youth. Inside the store, he gathered his supplies while the shopkeeper, a portly man with mutton chops, tallied up his purchases. Jake nodded toward the window. The woman outside with the children. What's her story? The shopkeeper's expression darkened. That's Mary Henderson. Widow. Her husband died 6 months back, kicked by a horse. Left her with those 5 young ones and nothing but debts. She's been trying to make it work, taking in laundry and mending, but there's not much call for it in a town this size. Far as I know, they've been going without for days now. She's too proud to beg, but I've seen the way those children look at the bread in my window. Jake felt something tighten in his chest. He'd been orphaned young himself, knew the gnawing ache of an empty stomach, the shame of needing help. She got any family? None that'll claim her. Her husband's people blamed her for his death, said she distracted him while he was working. Her own folks passed years ago. The shopkeeper shook his head. It's a crying shame, but what can you do? Times are hard for everyone. Jake paid for his supplies and added several items to his order without a word: flour, salt pork, beans, cornmeal, sugar, coffee, and a sack of hard candy. The shopkeeper raised an eyebrow but didn't comment as Jake carried the goods outside. He walked directly to Mary Henderson and set the provisions down at her feet. She looked up at him with startled eyes, blue as a summer sky despite the weariness etched around them. Sir, I don't take charity, she said quietly, but her voice cracked on the last word. Jake crouched down so he was at eye level with her. Ma'am, I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a job. Her brow furrowed in confusion. A job? I don't understand. I run a cattle ranch about 30 miles north of here. Been looking for someone to help with the cooking and housekeeping. My bunkhouse cook retired last month, and the men are about ready to mutiny over my attempts at making biscuits. He smiled slightly, trying to put her at ease. The job comes with a house, separate from the main bunkhouse. 3 bedrooms. Your children would have a roof over their heads, and you'd earn a fair wage. Mary stared at him as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. One of the middle children, a boy of about 8 with sandy hair and freckles, tugged at her sleeve. Mama? He whispered, but she gently shushed him. Why would you do this? She asked Jake, suspicion and hope warring in her expression. You don't know me. You don't know if I can even cook worth a damn. She immediately blushed at her language, covering her mouth with her hand. Jake stood and adjusted his hat. My mother was a widow with 3 boys. No one would hire her because they said children were a burden. We nearly starved before a rancher gave her a chance. She worked for him until the day she died, and he made sure we boys learned honest work. I figure I owe it to her memory to pass along that kindness. Tears spilled down Mary's cheeks before she could stop them. She quickly wiped them away, straightening her spine with visible effort. When would we need to leave? I've got business in town tomorrow. We could head out the day after, if that suits you. I'll arrange for a wagon to carry your belongings and the children. Mary looked at her 5 children, really looked at them, seeing the hope blooming in their thin faces. The oldest girl, whom Jake would later learn was named Sarah, nodded encouragingly at her mother. The baby in her arms cooed softly. Mary whispered something then, so quiet that Jake almost missed it. She leaned closer to him and said, "We haven't eaten in days." Jake felt those words like a punch to his gut. He knelt down again and looked at each child in turn, then back at their mother. "Never hungry again," he said firmly. "You have my word on that, ma'am. From this moment forward, you and your children will never go hungry again." He stood and gestured to the supplies he'd brought. "Let's start now. Sarah, is it?" He addressed the oldest girl. She nodded shyly. "Take your brothers and sisters inside with these provisions. I'm going to talk to the shopkeeper about getting you access to his kitchen for the evening. You'll have a hot meal tonight." The transformation was immediate. The children, who had sat so listlessly before, suddenly came alive with energy. They carefully gathered the food, their hands trembling with anticipation. The youngest boy picked up the sack of candy and looked at his mother for permission. When she nodded through her tears, his face split into a grin that could have lit up the darkening sky. True to his word, Jake arranged everything. He paid the shopkeeper for the use of his kitchen, and even bought fresh eggs and milk. That evening, he sat outside on those same wooden steps while Mary and her children prepared their first real meal in days. The sounds of laughter and clattering pans drifted through the open window, and Jake found himself smiling despite his usual stoic demeanor. When Mary called him inside, he found a table set with simple fare: scrambled eggs, fried salt pork, cornbread with butter, and coffee. It wasn't fancy, but it was abundant, and the children ate with single-minded focus, their eyes wide with wonder at the plenty before them. Mary ate too, though she kept glancing at Jake as if expecting him to disappear like a mirage. 2 days later, as promised, they set out for the ranch. Jake drove the wagon himself while Mary sat beside him, the baby in her lap. The other children bounced in the back, their spirits already beginning to recover with regular food in their bellies. They peppered Jake with questions about the ranch, about the cattle, about whether they'd see real cowboys and Indians. When they arrived at the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Mary gasped. The house Jake had described wasn't large, but it was solid and well-maintained, with a covered porch and real glass windows. It sat a short distance from the main ranch buildings, offering privacy while still being part of the community. Jake helped them unload their meager possessions, which barely filled one corner of the front room. He'd already arranged for basic furniture, linens, and kitchen supplies to be placed in the house. That night, for the first time in months, Mary Henderson and her 5 children went to bed with full stomachs and warm blankets, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring the same. Over the following weeks and months, Mary proved herself to be an exceptional cook and a hard worker. She prepared meals for the ranch hands that had them singing her praises, and she kept the bunkhouse cleaner than it had ever been. Her children thrived in the ranch environment. The boys learned to ride and help with chores, while Sarah helped her mother and minded the younger ones. They attended the small school in the nearest town, driven there each week by one of the ranch hands. Jake watched the transformation with quiet satisfaction. Mary's face filled out, the haunted look leaving her eyes. She laughed more easily, and sometimes he'd catch her humming while she worked. The children grew strong and confident, no longer bearing the marks of starvation and despair. One evening, about a year after that fateful meeting, Mary found Jake sitting on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset. She sat down beside him, a plate of still warm apple pie in her hands. "I made extra," she said, offering him a slice. "Thought you might like some." They ate in comfortable silence for a moment before Mary spoke again. "I never properly thanked you, you know, for what you did that day." Jake shook his head. "No thanks needed. You've more than earned your keep." "It wasn't just a job," Mary insisted. "It was the dignity of it. You could have just given us food and moved on. Instead, you gave us purpose, a future. You gave my children hope." She paused, her voice thick with emotion. "You kept your promise. We've never been hungry again." Jake looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw not the broken woman from those wooden steps but someone who had been given a second chance, and had seized it with both hands. My mother used to say that kindness is the only currency that multiplies when you spend it. I just passed along what was given to me. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Jake realized that in saving Mary and her children, he'd saved something in himself too. The loneliness that had plagued him for years had eased, replaced by the sounds of children's laughter, and the knowledge that he'd made a real difference in the world. Sometimes, he thought, the greatest adventures aren't found on the trail, but in the simple act of helping another soul in need. And true to his word, never once in all the years that followed did Mary Henderson or any of her 5 children go to bed hungry again.